Hello, welcome to the Hypnos tutorial. By this point, you're familiar with hooking up sensors to the Feather MO board, and you're comfortable with using Loom code and just looking at sensor data and compiling it on Arduino. So now the next step is working with our Hypnos power control board, which is made in-house. And this board is used for various microcontroller projects here at OPEnS Lab. The Hypnos uses a real-time clock that writes data to an SD card, and it regulates power using like timed or sensed events. So pretty much this is what really controls sensors in a lot of the projects that we have. You can put a sensor to sleep, it logs your data on an SD card so you can later upload onto your computer and analyze the data. So it's a very powerful board, and you're definitely going to use this at the OPEnS Lab at some point. So it's good to know how it works. So here on my screen, I have the GitHub repository for the Hypnos board. As you can see here, this is what it looks like. Let me pull myself up a little bit bigger. This is how the Hypnos board looks like. As you can see here, usually when you're assembling these Hypnos boards, as you can see on the screen, I'm kind of blocking it. There's no headers connected to the Hypnos, so you might have to connect some headers onto it. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to solder some male headers here at the bottom, so that you can place onto a circuit to a breadboard, and then you want to put female headers here at the top, so that you can attach your Feather MO board with male headers onto the Hypnos board. So once you've soldered your headers onto your boards and you have it all ready, they should be able to stack like this. And as you can see here, it matches perfectly. Let's go back to here. Here you can see the pinout for the Feather MO board. Sorry, for the Hypnos board, and it looks very similar to the Feather MO board because it's made for it. This is a good little sheet to have on hand to make sure you have a good idea of all the pinouts. And then here you can look down, look at the description, and there's some guides and more information here if you'd like to take a look. One thing to note here with Hypnos boards, at the lab you might find Hypnos boards with various versions. The one that I have right here, let me zoom myself up real quick. I have you can see it right here. You can, it says version 2, version 3.3. And that's how you can tell which version you have. This is important to know because when you're compiling your Arduino code, you want to make sure that in your Arduino code you're identifying which version you're going to use, because if you're using, if you don't make it explicit, your program's not going to work. And here you can see the different versions and what they work with. We have version 2. I don't think we have a lot of those in the lab. And you're mostly going to see these version 3s. Like I said, this is important to know whenever you have a Hypnos board. You want to make sure you know what board you're using so that you can pretty much program it with the right statements. And all right, we can move over to the software side of things. Before we hop into Arduino, I wanted to make a note of how the hookup should look with your sensor. As you can see here, I have my Hypnos board with its male headers connected onto the breadboard, and then I have the Feather MO board connected directly on top of the Hypnos board. One thing I forgot to mention is that when you're assembling your Hypnos board, make sure you're putting the headers in the right spot, because if you screw up your header placement during soldering, you're gonna mess up all the pinouts and your Hypnos board will not work properly with the MO board. So anyways, this is how it should look on a breadboard. As you can see here, I have a I2C sensor. It's an accelerometer that I will be demonstrating in these tutorials. And yeah, hooking the Hypnos board onto a breadboard and working with the sensor, it's pretty much the same as you've done before with hooking up sensors to a feather MO board. It's just now you have a Hypnos board with a feather board MO board connected on top of it. So yeah, it's pretty basic. You just want to follow the same rules of searching up your sensor's datasheet, identifying the right pin connections, and then connecting it onto a breadboard. And yeah, this is how your hardware should look, and it shouldn't be too different from what you've done before. Another thing that I wanted to demonstrate before we get into the Arduino code is that when you have your MO board hooked up to your Hypnos board correctly, you should see that these LEDs turning on. And yeah, if the LEDs are not turned on, that means that you haven't connected your Hypnos board correctly. Alrighty, this is the Arduino code for the Hypnos board. Again, you can find this on the Loom examples folder on the GitHub, and then you can navigate over to the Hypnos folder and find the Hypnos SD for this tutorial. Also, you want to do the same thing for the example code of the sensor that you're using in the Loom GitHub, so make sure you pull that up. And pretty much what we're going to be doing here is we're just going to be combining both of these example codes into one. But before we look into Arduino, I want to go over the Hypnos code. It should all look pretty familiar to you as you've worked with example code from Loom in the past. So here, as you can see, we're creating a manager object, then we're creating the Loom Hypnos object. One important thing here to note is that you want to make sure you're putting in the right version number in your Arduino code. If you're using a 3.3 Hypnos board, you want to make sure you're using a Hypnos version 3.3. If you do not have the right versions on your code, none of the code will work, and this is crucial. So make sure you're using the right version number. And then here in the setup, you're going to see it's all pretty familiar. We're going to have the manager begin serial, which is preparing the serial monitor. And this function right here, the Hypnos enable, is just enabling the Hypnos power rails, which are connected to the Feather MO board so that they can communicate within each other. Then here we have some test code that is just putting dummy data into the SD card to make sure everything is being logged properly. And then again, we've seen this before, the manager display data. It's going to display onto the serial monitor. And then finally, it's going to log it onto the SD card. And then here in the loop, this is where you're going to put most of your code in. So yeah, make sure you have the right version number when you're writing up your code. This is crucial. Okay, so onto the Arduino code. As you can see here, I've combined my accelerometer example code with the Hypnos code. And here you can see that I've called the right libraries, Loom Manager, the sensor library that I'm using, which is the accelerometer in my case, and then here the Hypnos library. Make sure you're calling these unless your code will not work. So here I have the sensor object name, and then I have the Hypnos object right here being declared with the right version number. And then in the setup, I put Hypnos enable. I've been told that you want to do this as the first thing in your setup, unless, and if you don't do this, you might run into problems. So make sure that you're doing the Hypnos enable before you begin the serial interface and initialize the manager. And then in the loop, again, this should look really familiar. You're managing, the manager is just going to measure the sensor from the data, and then it's going to package it into the JSON file, and then it's going to display it onto the serial monitor. And then here, this is some code that I just added when I was testing my sensor. And then finally, it's going to log it to the SD card and then repeat this in 5 seconds. Okay, so for the serial monitor, this is what it should look. It should look relatively familiar. You're going to have your manager name right here, the instance. You can also have the packet number, and then you're going to have your sensor data. When I was going through this tutorial, this part right here, the data, the sensor's data, it wasn't showing up on my serial monitor. And what had happened there was that I did not set up my sensor code properly. I had a an incorrect argument in the wrong place here, and that screwed up my code. So make sure that your code is correct with your sensor, and that that the wiring is correct. If you have not done that properly, you're going to run into issues where the Hypnos board is going to work fine, but you're not going to collect any data. So your Excel file is going to just pretty much be blank with no relevant information. So as you can see here, here's the data from the sensor name, and then the timestamp that this occurred at. Also, at the beginning, you're going to receive some messages. Since this has been running for a long time, I don't think I can access those messages, but pretty much it's going to tell you if the sensor's been initialized, if the SD card has been initialized, and any errors that have made occurred while you're booting up your Hypnos board. So the serial monitor will let you know if you've done everything correctly. I think you're going to get like a success message. And then here, I don't have an SD card hooked up into the Hypnos board, so that's why I'm getting this message. It can't write anything to an SD card because it's not in the Hypnos board. All right, so let's look at the Excel file. So here it looks relatively similar to the serial monitor data. It's just organized now into a nice little spreadsheet. As you can see here, no sensor data was being collected. This is the Excel file that I used when I had the incorrect code. So that's why I was getting no values for my sensor data. But if you've done everything correctly, you're going to have a nice little formatted rows and columns of your sensor data. And yeah, so that's pretty much it with the Hypnos tutorial. Again, it's pretty similar to what you've done in the past. It's just now adding a Hypnos board and adding Hypnos code into your sensors code. A few things I want to reiterate: make sure that your sensors code and wiring is correct, because you're gonna run into this problem right here where your Hypnos setup is working fine, but you're not getting any data from the sensor. So make sure that you're familiar and comfortable with setting up sensors and working with Loom code. And then also, when you're programming, make sure that you include the correct version of your Hypnos board, unless none of this will work. And congrats, you've finished this tutorial. Now you can move on to the Hypnos sleep video.